Welcome to Virtual Wednesdays at the DeYoung. I'm so pleased that you've joined us tonight. My name is Francesca D'Alessio. My team and I created Virtual Wednesday programs to encourage us all to connect through art in unexpected and meaningful ways. As we shelter in place, these weekly programs will introduce you to various artists, thought leaders, and museum staff. Join us every Wednesday at 5 p.m. as we aim to highlight unique viewpoints to reframe our exhibitions and collections. This program celebrates the launch of the DeYoung's new podcast series called Local Voices. The first 8 episodes will focus on local artists inspired by Frida Kahlo. Our incredible host, Rio Yañez, has been a wonderful collaborator and thought partner. He was born and raised here in the Bay Area by art royalty. His mother, Yolanda Lopez, is a renowned painter, printmaker, and activist. And his father, René Yañez, a painter, performance artist, curator, and community activist, was one of the founders of Galleria de la Raza. René Yañez brought Frida Kahlo's art to the Bay Area for the first time in the 1970s. Let's explore the impact of Frida Kahlo's art locally and welcome Rio Yañez to Virtual Wednesdays.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to Wednesday nights at the DeYoung Museum. My name is Rio Yañez. It's great to be virtually meeting you tonight. I'm very excited for tonight's lineup of our panel, starting with Celia Sagastume, otherwise known as Astrosagas. Celia is an astrologer, a performance artist, and a healer of many kinds, I feel. Their work has been blowing up on Instagram and throughout the internet, and I'm very, very excited to have them here today. Celia, welcome.
Thank you. It's really sweet.
Also joining us is the one and only Marilet Martinez. How else to introduce Marilet? She is an actor, improv comedian, the Marissa Tomei of the Mission District. She goes by many names, but she is an incredible and hilarious performer, and definitely a hometown hero for me. Marilet, welcome.
Hey, homeboy. So good to see you. I'm going to take that Marissa Tomei one to the bank.
I can dig it. All right. Celia, let's start with you. What is your outlook on 2020? What does the rest of the year look like from astrologically, from your perspective?
This is an auspicious time, not only for us, the Latino community of the United States, but nationally and even globally as we face the coming out of the chaos times that we're in. Possibly who will lead us out of this time that has completely cracked and shown the vulnerabilities of the systems that we have invested so much time and energy in. And so as we move into Dia de los Muertos, a time when the veil is thin, when we are able to connect to our roots and our ancestry, we have to really think about how we are going to ensure the future of our relationships, the future of our family, the future of our lineage, the future of our way of life, and who will lead us out of this mess and into that future where we will enjoy the interconnectedness that these new technologies bring us in a way that elevates the human condition for all, not just for those that are currently enjoying those privileges, but in a way that pays back those reparations that must be paid so that everyone who has contributed, lost, and participated in this system feels like that new step that we take is just for all.
And Celia, in your journey to this moment, how did you come into astrology? How did astrology as a practice enter your life?
Well, I actually had a bad breakup when I was 22 or 23. And I was like, I
I need help. And I was like Googling, and I put in my chart to like astro.com, which I still recommend. I think it's a really great site if you want to get like your whole astrology chart for free. And so they give you this like giant spit out list of like everything that's happening in your chart. And like the first thing on the list was this thing called sun square moon, which is where like your sun, which represents your ego and your drive, is at odds with your moon, which represents your emotional center. And so like learning about that like internal conflict really gave me like the ability to see what was happening on a way that I actually like was able to grab onto and start to build from. It was like the first time that somebody described something that was happening to me in a way that made sense and that gave me some form of agency. And so I was like, wow. And I like immediately just got hooked, you know, and that was, gosh, that was like back in like 2000 and maybe 12 or 13. And I've kind of been like building on my astrology practice ever since. I restarted it. I kind of took a really big break and got into grad school and got a master's degree in science. And I was working in public health for a few years, but I just really missed that creative practice. And in 2018, I realized, I was like, well, if this person can be the president of the United States, then I can be the astrologer. I was like, we're in this like level of reality where like anything goes. So if this guy's president, I'm going to stop pretending that I want to be anything else except an astrologer and just go for it. And so my map was literally Walter Mercado because I'd grown up watching Walter as a kid and was like obsessed. And so I was like, I have a camera, I have Instagram, I have social media, I know how to do this, I know how to perform. So I'm just going to do it. And that's how I got like restarted.
Tell us a little bit more about the performative aspect of your work. Like, you know, you mentioned Walter Mercado. Like what was like the aesthetic influence for your work and kind of the performative, like what do you have in mind, or what's your vision in terms of how you see yourself as a performer?
Well, it's definitely heavily influenced by Walter. I was one of those kids. Actually, when I was like really little, my parents thought that we were going to go back to Guatemala. So I wasn't allowed to watch American television. Like I literally could only watch Univision and Telemundo because they did not want us to be like unduly influenced by the Americans, right? And so I literally could only watch like Spanish television. And Walter was one of those like giant weirdos on TV that like people respected. And I was like, what is going on here? You know, like I was like, aren't we supposed to not be cool with this type of person? But there they are being like the astrologer that everybody listens to. And I was like, this is special. And I was always like really into that high glam aesthetic. When I started to do my own horoscopes, I knew I was definitely going for the Walter vibe with like I love doing like the signs like Aries, Cancer, Géminis, Capricornio. I love doing that. But like in my head, I'm like a little bit more like 80s influence. Like I love thinking of myself as like an 80s robot from outer space broadcasting myself into the internet with like whatever news I have for the week for like astrology, but also like if you're from a robot from the universe, then it's just like the regular weather patterns, right? And so I kind of think of myself that way. And I like get very specific. Like one image that I always think about is actually from the movie Back to the Future, the second one where they're in 2015 and they go into an 80s throwback cafe.
Yes.
There's like a video interface like, that it's like Michael Jackson and also Ronald Reagan and also Nixon. And they're just kind of like jerky.
Yeah.
I always think about that when I'm like performing. I think about that like the 80s glam and also like the weirdness of it, you know? So that's kind of, those are some of my influences that I bring together. I also got really lucky when since I was a kid, like in elementary school, my elementary had like a TV news that was like closed circuit, you know? And they asked me to be like the news anchor when I was like in third grade. Like the librarian came into my like class and was like, you. And I immediately was like, I didn't do it. I don't know what you're talking about. I didn't do it. And she's like, you're not in trouble. Just come with me. And I was like, okay. And so we like went down and like the whole little like studio was set up. And she's like, so you're going to read the news and you're going to read the news to this camera. And I was like, why? And she's like, because you like talking. So you're going to talk. And I was like, okay. And so I did it in elementary school. And then in high school, that happened to me again, where I was like picked to be like the TV like news person for my high school. And so I have like years of experience like talking at cameras. And so like from like a really young age. And so I'm like not, I don't know. I feel like sometimes I talk to people about like talking to cameras and like performing and they get really nervous. They like think a lot about like how people see them and what they're saying and making mistakes. And I just don't have that. I just have been like staring at a camera for a while, you know?
I'm just curious to know what initially brought you to San Francisco and the Bay, and how have you made it part of your community?
Is that for me or for Marilet?
For Celia, yes.
Oh, okay. Okay, so what brought me to San Francisco is that I think I mentioned earlier, my parents thought that we were going to go back to Guatemala. And the reason for that is that my mom did not want to move here. Like, my mom was like not trying to be an American at all. My dad came here when they were already dating, and he was like, I'm just going to go for 6 months. I'm going to save a bunch of money, and then we'll like buy a house in Guatemala. And my mom was like, cool. And then he was like here for 6 months, and he like loved it. He like fell in love, heart emojis, with California. And so he like goes back to Guatemala, and he's like, hey, like you should come with me to America. It's so cool. I think I want to live there. Like, let's get married. Let's be united, let's try to get citizenship. And my mom was like, yeah, no. She's like, I'm not trying to be an American. She's like, I really like Guatemala. She's like, but you can move there and you can just get an American girlfriend. She was like, you can just go. And my dad was like, whoa. And so he was like really into the United States. So he came back, but he would like save all his money to like fly like every 6 months to try and convince my mom. And he would write her letters every single week. And this was like 2 years of my dad doing this. And then 2 years later, my dad's like, okay, I got a new strategy. He's like, you should come with me to California and see how beautiful it is. And then you'll realize why I like it so much. And then maybe you'll move here with me. And she was like, fine. Okay, I'll give it a shot. And so he brought her here to San Francisco because he thought this was like the most beautiful city that he'd seen in California. And my mom like fell in love with it. And this is where she wanted to move. They ended up in LA, as most people do. And we moved to Miami when I was like 5 because of the smog for my little brother. But as soon as I was of legal age, I like ran straight back to California. I just was like really into Riot Girl music, particularly this band called Slater Kinney was like my favorite band. It was like really typical. Like I would like sit there in my room and like listen to like screamy Riot Girl music and being like, and my mom would be like, that's not music, what's wrong with you? And I was like, you don't understand me. And so as soon as I could, I like moved back to the West Coast to be with the weirdos. And I've been here ever since. I like thought I was just gonna go to like UC Berkeley and then maybe do something else, but I got here and I loved it and I've been here ever since.
Wow. All right. So to bring it back to the reason we're all here, and that's Frida and her kind of journey through San Francisco, her time here, but also her kind of aesthetic influence and the influence of her visual work as an artist. I'll start. Let's go to you, Celia. Like, how has Frida and Frida's kind of vision on the world influenced you and your work?
I love her raw vulnerability. That is one of the biggest inspirations from Frida, is just her unabashed courage to expose those parts of herself that are not pretty, that are not made for consumption, that are not prepackaged, and just being able to display that, sometimes really difficult disconnection, and that feeling of disenfranchisement or that feeling of isolation. And I think that she just does such a great job, like really conveying that raw emotional power through her work in a way that I find really inspiring and courageous. It's like one of the more courageous acts I've ever seen, and that's just like looking at her work. I also feel like for Frida, I identify a lot with Frida as like a light-skinned, like Latina person. And I think a lot about identity as like a Latina or a Latinx person in the world. And Frida's like the wearing of the traditional like Mexican clothing and the dresses and everything. I always think about that. Like I love wearing like we do huipil in Guatemala. And so I love wearing huipil and I love wearing Guatemalan texture. And, I do have ancestors that are Maya from Guatemala, and like, but I'm very far removed from that, right? Like as an American in the United States. And I don't have that living link, to that culture anymore. And I think like now in the modern world, it's a very big question, right? Like, authenticity and connection to the history and roots that you are trying to celebrate and bring to the forefront. And I think like for her, it was a very conscious choice to wear like the traditional Mexican clothing and to be really proud of that history and that lineage and that connection. And so I like do actually counsel quite a few like Latinx people about like, you know, ways to empower themselves with their culture while also being really respectful of the ancestry and the links or non-existent links that are there. Like, how do you hold your culture and your history in a way that is with integrity and with respect, and also being able to empower yourself and show like your history and who you are in this world. And I think about Frida a lot in that, like she made a conscious choice to do that, especially when she was entering Western culture and America, which she despised so much. And to be really like clear about like that even in what she wears, she's like countering those expectations and stereotypes put upon her by the Western world, you know. And I think that that's really powerful. And I think about it a lot because I feel like that question of authenticity and culture and the choices that you make about how to present yourself in the world are really big even now. We have Jessica Kruger, this like white Jewish lady who was pretending to be an Afro-Latina and made an entire career out of it, like teaching African-American studies, like at George Washington University. And I personally was really angry about that, and am really angry about that. And it like, I feel like these questions about authenticity and about connection to heritage are really important. They were really important then, and they're really important now. And I feel like Frida is one of those people that is like a guide almost into that world, or kind of like a guide, a post, literally, or like literally a guide really into entering how to be respectful and empowered by your culture and your history in a world that is trying to erase you. You know, and I think that that is something that she fought for and still fights for to this day, right? To come out of Diego's shadow and to come out of all of the lenses of expectations that are put upon her, and to be able to be seen for who she really is. I think that that was really difficult for her to do in her time. And I think it's still really difficult for people to do now. And so I think that her courage and her strength and her convictions are really inspiring. And there's something that I think about often when I think about authenticity and I think about courage.
Wow. Marilet, how did you first come to Frida's work, and how has she kind of influenced your aesthetics and performance?
I can't exactly name like a time where I was like, I was introduced to Frida Kahlo's work on this time and this, but I'm just gonna like blame your dad. I'm sure your dad had something to do with it. Like just like generally somewhere in the mission. Yeah, I think like, I feel like Frida's just growing up, you know, like her image was always around. So in this way, she's always been a presence. And she felt very familiar to me, even though I didn't necessarily, I could recognize her, but I didn't know who she was when I was very young. And then sort of after, you know, and just sort of the like, she's a painter, she's a this, you know, she's a Marxist, she's a, you know, she's a queer woman, she's all of these different things. And just sort of a lot of what Celia said, like, feels very resonant and connected for me as well. And I think that in addition to much of what you said, when I think about Frida, I think about like capacity. And I think about, particularly when it comes to love and forgiveness, because of her very sort of tumultuous and public relationship with Diego. And, you know, and she writes about it, and she in letters and poems and all sorts of things, where she is a very fallible person in love. And having been that person many times in my life, I was like, oh, girl, same. And so I think the part of her that is both an unabashed romantic who like can't keep her feet on the ground, while also being like terribly pragmatic and like revolutionary and radical in her politics. Like, I was like, yep, you have to have this level of optimism and this level of capacity to just sort of hold all of these ideas and all of these feelings. And even if it feels, and she's very vulnerable and candid when she can't hold them, or when she's like, I'm drowning in them, or it's too much. And like, she's still very nimble in that world. She's still very pliable in her response to all of these things that are happening to her emotionally and socially. So I think taking a lot of that sort of like, that vigor and that, I feel like passion is overused, but I'll say passion, has very much infiltrated itself in my work and how I present my work and how I collaborate with people. Definitely, the early kernels of it in terms of my improv life and my comedy world. When I was still in San Francisco, I had a duo with a woman named Marcia Kalin, and she is incredible. And we had an improv duo called Pura Pocha. And it was like, we did bilingual improv, and we used loteria cards to help inspire our scenes. And like, it was very much like, hey, we're living in like this, who we are. We performed in Huipiles, like this is what this, and we were mostly performing for Anglo audiences, mostly performing for Spanish speaking audiences. And that was incredible. And the response was very, very well received. And then when I moved out here to Chicago and I found Jesse and Abby and Kendra, who were part of Ratas, just really taking that level of like unabashed, we are who we are. Like, we're gonna do us, and we don't care if anybody else is in the room. And it just so happened that other people were in the room and they liked it, And so definitely, one of the things that we do every year, which I kind of have to figure out how to do this year in this format, is we do a Dia de los Muertos show where we marry this very nerdy thing that we do called improv with cultural ritual. And I feel like Frida is a really amazing example of somebody who had such a rich cultural life and put that completely into their artistic side. And maybe at the time it wasn't as well received, but the people who it did resonate with, and it still resonates with, that impact is undeniable. And like, I was looking at some of her artwork again this week, just sort of, like in preparation for today, and just sort of being like, oh, like, let me just reconnect with her artwork, because I haven't looked at her artwork in a long time. Like, I always see like her pictures and like her self-portraits, but I was like, let me see the stuff that isn't just her. And just seeing how nuanced and big some of those pieces are. Like, they're both conceptually very large while having these like very minute things. And I think like that's how I approach a lot of my work in collaboration. That's how we as Ratas kind of approach our work, is like, we have these really big ideas, and then we're like, boom, let's siphon it into these like sort of smaller little bits that create this bigger whole. So I definitely think like there is such a presence of her and lots of other sort of Latinas that have come before her that have influenced definitely like my performing life, my writing life, and just sort of who I want to work with and who I reach out with to collaborate with, and whose stories I want to help tell, and as well as my own, like, how do we bring part of one of the things I really like doing in this work is like kicking any door that's like in the way, just kicking that down and like trying to get everybody else through that doorway as possible. And like any sort of like, I don't like the idea of like, there's only room for one of you at the table. I'm like, dismantle the table, put it into the fire, we'll be warm, put a blanket down. Like, there's room for everybody. So I think like Frida is such a huge figure, because she has inspired so many people to do so many different kinds of things. Because she is representative of somebody who is bicultural, as well as, having this very particular relationship with America. And I think as like a little like baby pocha growing up, I was like, I feel conflicted about America too, so like that, I think there's definitely like, she's always present. I feel like she's kind of always there.
I think one of the interesting things about Frida in kind of looking at historical documentation of her time in San Francisco is that, she's constantly being referred to as Mrs. Rivera, Diego Rivera's wife. There's, whatever, she, despite her work and her, this iconography and presence to her. She really had to, she really wasn't recognized as an artist, when she was here in the city, ironically. But it's in seeing all that documentation of her time in San Francisco, it really struck me just the duality of who she was and how she kind of negotiated space going back and forth between the United States and Mexico. And it's that duality of race, of gender, of sexuality. And I feel like we're only now kind of catching up with a lot of the vocabulary, that vocabulary to really talk about her work and her life. Mm-hmm. And I'm just wondering, like, how in your own work and how you relate to her work, that idea of a duality, just in terms of race, of gender, and of sexuality. Celia?
Yeah, I guess I have to disagree with you a little bit. I don't think there's a duality. I think there's like a multiplicity. I think like I'm definitely one of those like spectrum people that's like, there's more, like I definitely identify as non-binary, and I'm transgender. I do not identify with like male or female. I believe that there are male and female and other gender characteristics, and they can like combine and recombine in different ways. I love like that idea of non-binary as being like not like in the middle, but maybe like both sometimes, maybe leaning one towards sometimes, maybe leaning the other towards sometimes, and never quite reaching a place that is like settled. Like I remember when I just moved to San Francisco, somebody in my community told me that, like they were older than me, and they said that one of the things that they wanted from people that they dated was for them to like be, like have their gender be like concrete, like whatever it is that it's going to be, like have them have figured it out already. Like, and what they meant was like, they didn't want to be like when somebody was like, in the middle of like questioning or something like that, and I still remember that, because like for me, I'm like, that's, well, like I'm going to be there for life. Like I don't really feel like there is a settling that ever happens. I think that I like really enjoy just showing up in whatever way I feel called to show up to certain situations. I find like a high glam femme presentation, as I'm doing right now, to be really empowering. Like I think there's a lot of power in wearing like high glam. I feel really put together. I feel like I can say things and look really good, and I also really love like wearing like more not femme or not high glam stuff, and like being able to just like be chill and like, and like walk through the world without getting a lot of like attention, and so I find both things really powerful. And I have experienced different gender expressions in my life. I've been, I've been perceived as male. Like I'll say it that way. I've been perceived as male for quite a few years of my life, and I've been perceived as female for quite a few years of my life. And now I think I have settled somewhere that is not either, and I'm really comfortable there. And when I look at Frida's work, I see a lot of changes over time and in places for particular reasons. Sometimes I feel like Frida was somebody who was very intentional. And I think that she was very intentional about her presentation, like both, like I think about that family portrait where she wore that suit, and then also just like the beautiful like self-portraits in like full, like what I would say is like high glam femme, like we be full makeup. And then again, like portraits where she's like cutting off her hair and being in mourning. And I think that all those moments exist for her over time and in space, and that I don't think that her gender is located in like one place or the other. I think for her, it's like in this space, I feel empowered by showing up this way. And then, one day later, I'm showing up in this other space as a completely different expression of myself. And I kind of see it. I mean, I'm an astrologer, so I guess at some point I have to like go back to astrology and be like, for me, I would see it as just like seeing different parts of yourself and recombining them in different ways in order to feel empowered in different situations, and that's what I think of when I think of her expression and her character. So yeah, so I guess for me, like, it's inspiring to see. I think I love to like identify other people in the world who have approached life and approached like the multiplicity of expressions in a way that I have, because it like is kind of confirming in a way. Like I think a lot of us people who are like trans or who are genderqueer, who are non-binary, have a really hard time when we're young being able to vocalize or express or identify like what it is that we are feeling or wanting to be, because there are very few people in the world that inhabit that, you know. And so that I feel is part of my work as well, to be like, this is real. I am a real person. You can do this. Like I can be both. I can be none. I can be multiple. I can be, you know, and it's okay. And I don't need to tell you like what's in my pants. I don't need to define for you like what I was born as, you know, like it is okay for me to just move between things and never find like that settled place. And I think Frida is one of those people that I see it in her work. And it was like, definitely the first thing that called me to her when I was like really young, you know, like to just see that like, you know, on one hand, like full high femme, and then on the other hand, like full, like, you know, masculine performance. And then seeing like that in the middle, that movement. I think that's really beautiful.
Wow. Wow. All right.
When you were talking, Celia, it was making me, I had a like, seeing Frida in her like very mask self was always like very impactful. I do remember seeing that being like, oh, you know, and it always like, it brought me back to the Prince lyric, I'm not a woman, I'm not a man, I'm something that you'll never understand. Like, and I feel like there's so many people who live in that place who haven't necessarily been allowed to live in that place in sort of a more public way. And Frida was one of those people who did and allowed and sort of, again, kicked that door open and was like, hey, like, this is cool. And like, I very much of like, you know, enjoy playing with both of those parts of myself and like being like, oh, today I feel more this, today I feel more that. And sort of showing up in spaces like as I, you know, like I feel very like Latina Marilyn Monroe with my dyed blonde hair right now. But like, you know, there's times where I'm very much not that, where I'm just like, in my big dickies with like my hat on, you know, and just like feeling very in that part of myself. And so like being able to live in these spectral places and being able to, and as an artist, being able to play a spectrum of different things too is such a, it's a survival skill in a lot of ways, I think, both creatively and societally.
So some questions from the chat. We'll start with you, Celia. I think you may have touched on this, but we'll do it for you and Marilet. Please share your astrological sign and some of the traits that definitely apply to you from your astrological sign.
Marilet, do you want to go? I don't know your sign.
Oh my God, yes. I was like, I want to know. I want to hear what you have to say. Yes, I am a Leo sun, Leo moon with a Scorpio rising. I know, shock, awe, surprise you.
I know. I figured there was Leo, just because I was like, yep, yeah. That's really cool.
Yeah.
What do you think of your Leo? I'm Scorpio rising.
You know what? I love it. I was I didn't know I had a Scorpio rising until a few years ago, and I did this really dope workshop with Sonia Marie, who's the astrologer for Essence magazine, and she's a lovely human, and like she did like a read for me. And she was like, because I had thought that I thought I was like a triple Leo. And I was like, oh, good God, help us all. And she was like, hold on. And she like broke it out. And she was like, no, you're a Scorpio rising. And I was like, for real? And she's like, yeah. Have you ever walked into a room and been like, oh my God, I want to hug everyone, but also like back up. I don't want to talk to anybody. I want to make sure everything's okay first. I was like, that's my whole life, just like living in this weird space of like, yes, but no. And she was like, yeah, it's your Scorpio rising. And I was like, seen, heard, validated. Like I cried. I'm not even gonna play. Like I cried. And so yeah, like it's something that I've learned to embrace more from that moment. Like I've been embracing it more. And let me tell you, Scorpios they're dope. I love them.
A very powerful placement.
Yes.
And another question from the chat. You know, there's been kind of we're in this unique moment where there's this definite rise of Latinx kind of pop culture icons. I mean, there's suddenly a very, very kind of large focus on the iconography of like Selena, of Walter Mercado, of Frida. Like, what are your thoughts on kind of this moment that we're in, and especially like looking towards Frida, where there's definitely a lot of focus on her aesthetics. What are your thoughts in this kind of this moment of attention that we're in?
Well, first of all, when it comes to Frida and I see her face on like tote bags and socks and t-shirts, I'm like, she's anti-capitalist, you idiots! Like, so the part of me that just kind of like, whenever I see it is like, acknowledges that. And I also feel like, I think the idea that there is now like a mainstreamization of any of these people, I think speaks to the fact that people are finally starting to understand on a grander scheme that people from the Americas make up a huge population in this country and have been underserved as far as representation goes. So we have, so we pick the handful that we know and that are accessible, right? The Fridas, the Selenas, the Walters, and we throw them and we put it in front of all these things and we do documentaries and I think for me, I'm like, yeah, sometimes it could feel a little overkill, and I'd rather feel overkill for the next 2.5, 3 decades until this just becomes normal, until there's 37 versions of a Frida, until there's 80 versions of a Walter Mercado, until like you throw a stone and there's 14 Selenas, like I feel like we have these icons. I think these icons are an invitation. These icons are an invitation and an inspiration for others to be like, look, go forth and do. We did it, you do it. So I think while there is a huge, at times, like I will very much be cynical and roll my eyes and be like, oh, I can't believe they're putting, they're doing this thing or that thing. Fully being guilty of creating a Selena show myself. I think that it's important. I think that we are in a space where we need to celebrate our icons so that they are not just our icons, so that other people can learn and respectfully understand who they are. And so that there is a greater contextualization for who these people are and their influences are in our cultures, and throughout the Americas, and not just the Americas, but throughout the world, like Walter's reach is global, yeah, I'll stay there. Celia, what do you have to say?
No, I totally agree with you. I mean, I definitely think about how Frida's an anti-capitalist at the core, and I think it's really funny to see like all her pictures everywhere. I also think there's like a lot missing about her story when we just produce her picture, because like, I mean, no doubt her self-portraits are beautiful, but always the ones that are picked are the ones that are like very cisnormative, very like, put together, very attractive, very like very flat, you know what I mean? And like those more difficult portraits, the ones that are actually like her power, like that Scorpio vibe of like, here is my deepest, darkest inside, like just out on this canvas for you to look at. We can't look at those. We can't reproduce those. We can't handle those yet, but I'm looking forward to the day where we're able to do that for ourselves, where we don't have to just present like the happy veneer, the like superficial happy Frida, and we're able to like actually access that like raw core of ourselves. That is what she really built her power on. On top of that, I also agree with you that I think it indicates the rise in Latinx population in the United States, which I think is one of the big fears of the white people in the world right now, and the white people in America right now, are the fact that they will not be the majority in like 30 years. And like we're already like a much bigger slice of the demographics than we were.
So much.
And I think that like this rise in iconography and this rise in commercialization, I mean, capitalism will reproduce and sell anything as long as it makes money. So I kind of look at like capitalist trends sometimes as just being reflective of like whatever the culture we're in and whatever the demographics are that are being, celebrated. And so when I see the rise in Bad Bunny, when I see the rise in reggaeton, like when I first, because I grew up in Miami, so when I moved here to the Bay, for years, 10 years, I would go to dance parties and be like, why doesn't anybody play reggaeton? Like I was like, why doesn't anybody know Evie Queen? Like, why doesn't anybody play Don Omar? Like, why? Like, I'm like, I miss it. Do you guys know how to dance? I don't think you know how to dance. And it was like finally, in like the last 5 years, people started playing perreo and people started playing Bad Bunny, like here in clubs in the Bay. And I was like, oh, this is because of Bad Bunny, but this is also because of the rise in Latinx culture, like in the United States. And I am really excited about that. Like, I'm not excited about the commercialization. I'm like, okay, like, you know, unfortunate side effect of being in a, you know, still capitalist environment is that we're going to see like commercial reproductions of our icons. But it indicates that we are growing as a demographic, we are growing as a population, and we're growing as a source of power. And we have that ability to use these connections that we have to culture and to each other through these like icons that we love to also move our political power and like coalesce around certain issues that we really need to start pushing and that we really need to get behind, you know, like we really need to like use that as an indicator that our power is growing and then be able to use it, like identify it, feel empowered, and start connecting to each other as a community in order to make some of these big changes that we need to make as a society. And that we don't need to wait for like white Americans to come around to figuring out that the way they've been running things is not working. We don't need to wait for them anymore. Like we are growing in power and we are able to coalesce as a coalition across Black, Indigenous, people of color and make these changes together. And so that's what I'm excited about. And that's what I think about when I think about all that reproduction. Like I'm like, cool, you can reproduce the image all you want, but all that's showing me is that our power as a community is rising and that we are going to be able to make some shifts very soon.
Yes.
So one thing to kind of wrap up our discussion, we're gathered here kind of under the umbrella of our kind of the appreciation of Frida and her influence amongst us. To keep that spirit going forward, I'm going to ask you to share with us another artist, either a visual artist or a performing artist, to kind of put everyone up on, like someone whose work you're really enjoying these days, someone whose work you wanted to bring a little attention to, who right now is kind of very exciting and at the forefront for you in terms of arts.
Oh man, there's so many good ones. Immediately, someone who comes to mind, biasly, is a friend of mine. His name is Greg Edwards. He's a stand-up comic and a visual artist out of Los Angeles. Right now, he has, over the last several years, he's been developing a series called the Red Line series, wherein he takes a prolific Black figure from the city that they're from and puts their image over the city. And it's a black and red image, and the red is to show where the redlining in terms of like the politics happened in that particular city. And it's a really powerful series, and he's got so many beautiful and amazing icons on there. So Greg Edwards is definitely one that comes to mind immediately, just because and he's also been creating a lot of work in response to the Black Lives Matter, as well as the police brutality that's been going on, and just a lot of really powerful images that like stay with me throughout the day, and I sort of like continue to reflect on throughout the day. So I would say Greg Edwards. I can look up his Insta in a second. Well,
all right. And Celia, how about you? Is there an artist you'd like to put us all up on?
Yeah. I mean, I guess this person's kind of already famous, but my favorite is Ebony G. Patterson. She's from Kingston. I saw her work at the PAM, the Perez Art Museum in Miami, and it just blew me away. I saw it twice because I happened to be in Miami for a month, and I went twice to the museum just to go sit in it. It was this entire room that she completely like made into an indoor garden at night. So it was so beautiful. She put like the sound inside of it, so you could like hear like the fireflies and like the distant, and it was all about like colorism within Black communities and within like Caribbean communities, and how like talking about like skin bleaching and talking about the grief of like losing power like within your own homeland. And she's a really powerful artist. I think her imagery is gorgeous and vivid and so alive. And when I went into that room, it just struck me, like it just hits you. Like, so if you're able to see Ebony Patterson's or Ebony G. Patterson's work, like at any museum, I highly, highly recommend it. She's doing a lot of work around capitalism as well. A lot of her work was about, she ordered tapestries that were like knit at walmart.com. And so like, she would embellish them, like giant tapestries that were like on the wall with like all these embellishments. And like, there were multiple layers to her work. And so it was like painting, but it was also tapestries, but it was also like embellishing that she did by hand. And she was talking about how like these major tapestries, like they used to be like the, you know, the province of people of like really high class, right? Like, especially during like, you know, Baroque periods or stuff like that. And nowadays, anybody can go and order one at walmart.com. And so she did, you know, and like she writes that into her work, like about like commercialization and capitalism and how it makes all these things accessible, but what it is that you actually need, which is like respect and power within your society, you don't get. And so talking about that like distinction and that difficulty is like a big part of her work, that like distinction between empowerment but also losing like your power, you know, through capitalism and through white supremacy is a really big part of her work. And I think it's amazing. And then the other person that I wanted to talk about is Edgar Fabian Frias. He's on Instagram, and he does these like, he's also like a I want to say like probably a self-described wizard or like magical person on social media, who does a lot of like video art, and who I thoroughly enjoy. And he does a lot of like video spells like on Instagram. So it'll be like, there are more than two genders, and it's just like people like dancing with like magical symbols around them. And I love whenever he pops up in my feed. I'm like, yes. So those are two folks that I thoroughly enjoy right now.
All right. Well, to bring things to a close, if people viewing at home would like to see more of your work, where is the best place for them to find you?
Go ahead, Celia.
Oh, sure. So I am Astrosagas. You can find me on Instagram as Astrosagas. And then I also have a website, astrosagas.com. And also my YouTube is also Astrosagas. I just wanted to explain really quick, because I've never actually gotten a chance to explain Astrosagas. So is it really quick if I'm just explaining why I got that name?
Sure.
So I mentioned earlier that my father passed away in 2014. And he was a Luis. And he worked at the airport with many Luises. So everybody just called everybody by their last name, because otherwise you'd be like Luis and more Luis and Luis and Luis. And so he was always Sagas, because our last name is Sagastume, which is too long. So it was just Sagas. And so I took his nickname Sagas and put Astro in front of it to be like the story of the stars, but also it's an homage to my dad. And so when people call me Sagas, I feel like it's like his nickname is continuing, which I really
That's so beautiful.
Wow.
Oh, I love that.
I've never gotten a chance to explain it. I've always just been like, I want to tell people. It's like my dad's name, you know? But yeah, so Astrosagas.
All right.
I love. I am on El Insta. I am at Marilet Martinez SF. You can look at that. And then through there, you can also find the Rata de Dos Patas, what is it, page, account. I also do stuff with Comedy Sports Chicago. Little blurb of what that is. It's competitive short form improv. It is as ridiculous as it sounds. Think like if the people on Whose Line with Is It Anyways were like playing on sports teams against each other. That's what Comedy Sports is. And so we've been doing virtual matches, which have been going really well. So I think that's just CSZ.com, something like that. CSZ Chicago, that's what it is, CSZchicago.com. And so I'm playing, I've got a show like right after this. And then I'm doing 2 shows tomorrow and then shows forever. So I'm there. And then Ratas is probably doing some sort of virtual version of our Dia de los Muertos show. So look out for that. And then we're also looking to reprise either virtually or in real time life at some point our Invocation of Selena show, which is all inspired by Selena Quintanilla Perez. So yeah, those are the different places you can find me and see what's going on.
Love it.
All right. Well, Marilet, Celia, thank you both so much for sharing your stories with us and reflecting on Frida and her powerful work. I really appreciate your time. And On behalf of the DeYoung Museum, we want to thank everyone for tuning in and spending this time with us. I want to invite everyone to check out Local Voices celebrating Frida Kahlo. It's the DeYoung's podcast, now available on the Fine Art Museum SoundCloud and Spotify. New episodes come out every Monday. If you want more information about the artists, featured artists and upcoming events, please visit the DeYoung's website at deyoung.famsf.org. And we'd love to hear from you. So just send us additional questions and feedback at publicprograms@famsf.org. This is your host, Rio Yañez, saying, may your houses be blue and your Diegos be faithful. Have a good night, everyone.
Thank you so much, Rio, and thank you, everyone. That was so much fun. Frida Kahlo, Appearances Can Be Deceiving, is now on view at the DeYoung Museum. Tickets are selling out fast, so we recommend booking your tickets in advance online at tickets.famsf.org. Again, that's tickets.famsf.org. And please check out our podcast, Local Voices, on anchor.fm/famsf. Again, our podcast, Local Voices, can be found at anchor.fm/famsf. Thank you so much, and we'll see you next week.